You enter the canyon, and the air itself seems heavy, as if burdened by a silence older than memory. The cliffs loom above you, sheer walls of stone that stretch like the ribs of some ancient beast. And in their shadows lies a darkness that does not welcome, but commands. The wind dies as you step forward, and what greets you there is not emptiness, but presence. At first, you think the rock is alive. Shapes press out of it, ghostly and pale, like spirits clawing to escape. Then your eyes adjust, and you see them for what they are. Hands, dozens upon dozens, hundreds perhaps. Some large and splayed, some tiny and delicate, some twisted, some broken. They cover the walls in every direction, each one a human imprint, a body's last insistence. I was here. They are not painted in strokes, but in shadows. Pigment blown against skin, sprayed through hollow bones until flesh became stencil, until life became absence. What remains are silhouettes, fragments of breath made permanent in stone. Each one belongs to a person who once stood where you now stand, their heart beating, their chest rising with breath, their eyes filled with the same fear and wonder that fill yours. Yet no sound remains. The cave swallows every echo, leaving only the scream of silence. It is not the silence of peace, but of voices cut off mid-sentence, of words you will never hear. You feel it in your chest, pressing down, the weight of thousands of lives reduced to the outline of a palm. Some hands are complete, but others are not. Fingers vanish where they should remain, leaving jagged, truncated shadows. Were they folded in ritual? Were they severed in sacrifice? Or is this simply the language of a world too distant for you to decipher? You do not know. You cannot know. And that ignorance gnaws at you. The wall is not a picture. It is not art in the way you think of art. It is a gathering, a congregation of the dead and the living, layered one upon another for millennia. Each new hand pressed against the prints of ancestors, each one covering yet also joining, as if the cave itself demanded that no voice remain alone. It is less a painting than a chorus stripped of sound, leaving you stranded in its silence. And as you stand before it, you realize something you cannot ignore. These hands are reaching for you. They cross 9,000 years of stone and time to clutch at your presence, demanding that you carry them forward, that you refuse to let them vanish again. If you can stand here in front of 9,000-year-old hands reaching through time and still not subscribe to Cave Tales' ancient history, I honestly don't know what could move you. Those who refuse explain why in the comments, because these voices deserve to be heard. The canyon that holds these voices lies in the desolate heart of Patagonia, Argentina, far from the comfort of cities, far from the sound of human crowds. It is a land carved by wind and silence, where cliffs rise like broken teeth from the earth, and rivers snake through barren valleys as though trying to escape the weight of time. To reach this place is to walk through emptiness itself, where each step feels like trespass, and the horizon never ends. It is here, in this remote desert gorge, that the cave stands. Cueva de las Manos, the Cave of the Hands. Its name is as literal as it is haunting, for when the first outsiders stepped inside, what they found were not artifacts or bones, but walls overwhelmed with hands. Generations of prints covering stone in a frenzy of persistence, each one an echo of a moment no longer here, yet the cave was never truly lost. The people of Patagonia, the descendants of those who once walked with guanacos across these plains, had always known of it. They carried the stories, though in fragments, until explorers and archaeologists finally wrote them down. To the world, it was a discovery, but to those who lived in its shadow, it was memory. The first scientific records appeared in the late 19th century, when travelers wandered these ravines and returned with sketches and accounts of impossible walls painted with hands. Later, in the 20th century, systematic study began. Radiocarbon testing, pigment analysis, mapping of every line and shadow. But even before science began to measure and catalog, the cave had been waiting, untouched, preserved by the harsh mercy of its environment. The dry climate sealed its pigments in place, the desert winds driving away the moisture that might have eroded them. The isolation, brutal as it was, kept intruders from trampling its surfaces. The canyon itself became guardian and tomb, holding in silence what no human voice could have carried across 9 millennia. Think about it. Archaeologists crossed deserts to study these walls, but you can explore it from your own screen. If you won't subscribe after that, at least leave a comment telling me why you'd turn away from history itself. Inside the cave, the walls close in like a skin stretched over bone, and every inch of that skin is marked. Most striking are the hands. Left hands, hundreds of them, pressed in negative space. They bloom in red, black, and white, stark against the rock. The colors are not decoration, but declaration. Red from iron-rich hematite, black from the soot of charcoal and manganese, white from kaolin clay. Each pigment ground down, mixed with fat or spit, and blasted through hollow bone until flesh became shadow. The left hands dominate, their mirror images repeated again and again. It is no accident. To spray the pigment, they had to hold the bone in their right hand, leaving the left fixed against the stone. What you see is the ghost of a gesture, each palm splayed wide, each set of fingers frozen forever in an instant of presence. But the hands are not alone. Beneath them and between them stretch the shapes of guanacos, the wild ancestors of llamas, their bodies shown in tense arcs as if pursued by hunters. Arrows streak toward them, etched in pigment, capturing the rhythm of life and death that sustained these people. Other figures emerge, spirals, zigzags, strange geometric designs whose meanings remain locked behind the silence of centuries. To us, they are puzzles, fragments of a language without translation. The cave is not a single painting, but a layered history. Hands overlap other hands, new images pressed atop the faded ones of generations before. Over time, the wall became a palimpsest of lives lived and lost. Each return to the cave, another voice added to the silent chorus. Centuries of hunters, mothers, children, and elders. Each left their mark not just as individuals, but as a community tethered to stone. And yet this cave is not alone in its mystery. Across the world, hands rise from rock in places far removed from Patagonia. In Europe's Paleolithic caves, stencils whisper from the walls of France and Spain. In Australia, ochre hands stretch across sandstone. In Africa, prints lie hidden beneath the sunburnt cliffs of the Sahara. Always the same gesture, always the same haunting silence. Why this need to leave a hand upon stone? What fear, or longing, or ritual drove such a universal cry? Each site is distant, each culture distinct, yet all chose the same symbol, the hand. The most human of marks. The first tool, the first weapon, the first language. Pressed against stone, it is both presence and absence. Proof that someone was here, and yet proof also that they are gone. They all reach out from the dark to touch you, to remind you that no matter how far the centuries stretch, we are still bound by the same need to leave a trace. Science has tried to measure what silence refuses to tell. In the darkness of this cave, the pigments themselves became witnesses, tiny fragments of carbon sealed in the dust of minerals and the fat of animals. Archaeologists scraped at the edges of the images, lifting slivers of paint that once clung to bone and breath. Through radiocarbon dating, they pulled time itself into focus, fixing the unfathomable into numbers. The results are staggering. The oldest hands pressed here reach back to around 7,300 years before the Common Era, a time when ice still lingered in the far south, and when the people of Patagonia roamed with the wild guanacos across the windswept plains. The youngest paintings were made more than 7 centuries into our own era. That span, nearly 8,000 years, means this was not the work of a single tribe, a single ritual, or even a single world. Generations passed, cultures shifted, and still they returned to this place, pressing their hands against the stone as if compelled by something deeper than memory. Imagine the scale of that endurance. In one era, a child may have stood against the wall, trembling as pigment clouded around their fingers. Centuries later, another child, descendant or stranger, returned to lay their hand over the fading ghost of that same print. Layer upon layer, hand upon hand, they built a palimpsest of human lives, a living archive written not in words, but in flesh made shadow. The cave became a calendar of the human will to be remembered. As languages shifted, as tools changed, as migrations swept across the land, one thing did not falter: the need to leave a mark, to resist erasure, to press one's existence into stone and demand that the earth itself carry it forward. 8,000 years of stories painted on stone. But some of you still won't hit subscribe. Fine. Tell me in the comments what more it would take, because if this doesn't earn your attention, nothing will. The paintings were not conjured in an instant. They were born from labor, from patience, from ritual acts repeated countless times. Stones were gathered from the earth, hematite for red, manganese for black, kaolin for white, each one chosen, broken, and ground into a fine powder until the pigment was as soft as ash. These powders were not mixed idly. They were blended with fat, with saliva, with whatever binding the people could draw from their world, transforming dust into color that could cling to stone for thousands of years. The tool was as humble as it was ingenious: hollow bones. The bones of birds, light and narrow, cleaned and fitted into the mouth. A hand pressed against the wall, a mouth filling with pigment, and then a breath, sudden, sharp, explosive. The spray burst across the skin, wrapping it in color, coating stone with shadow. When the hand was pulled away, what remained was not the body, but the absence of the body, a void in the shape of flesh. Over and over this act was repeated, until the cave was filled with silent negatives, every one of them a frozen exhalation. You can almost feel it, the sting of dust in the throat, the burn in the chest as pigment is blown into the air, the trembling of the hand as it presses against the cold stone, waiting for its outline to emerge. Most hands are left hands, and the reason is simple but telling. To hold the bone sprayer required the right hand, the stronger hand, the hand of control. That choice leaves the left as the one pressed into stone, sacrificed to become eternal. These are not portraits in the traditional sense. They are signatures made by absence, by what was given up in the moment of creation. And then there are the distortions. Some prints lack fingers, shadows of hands cut short, incomplete, unsettling. Were fingers folded under, curled into the palm to create a code we can no longer read? Or were they truly missing, severed in ritual sacrifice, the pain etched forever into the wall? The answer is lost, but the effect is undeniable. These are not ordinary hands. They are marked by choice, by ceremony, perhaps by suffering. Other shapes are stranger still: elongated palms, exaggerated fingers, designs that blur the line between human and something other. Were they masks, meant to alter identity? Were they symbols of transformation, of becoming animal, spirit, ancestor? In the flickering light of fire, these distorted hands would not have looked human at all, but something more haunting. Shadows of beings both familiar and alien, pressed into the cave as if to remind us that the past is not safe, not simple, not gentle. This was not just art. It was performance. It was ritual. Each stencil was a moment of breath turned into permanence, a gesture that still echoes across 9,000 years of silence. The cave does not explain itself. It shows, it overwhelms, but it never answers. And so the question remains, why? Why did ancient people return again and again to press their hands into stone? Some believe it was a rite of passage. Imagine a young hunter, trembling as his elders guided him into the cave, his hand fixed to the wall as breath carried pigment over skin. The act transformed him, announcing to the community that he had crossed a threshold, that childhood was gone, and the mark on the cave proved it. The wall became a register of lives, every new hand another name written in silence. Others see hunting magic. The guanacos painted alongside the hands suggest that these walls may have been more than a place of memory. They could have been a place of survival, where the act of painting animals and hunters created power over them, shaping the chase before it ever happened. To leave a hand was to join the ritual hunt, to take part in a spell of survival. Then there is the matter of the missing fingers. Some stencils end in stumps, as though the hand itself had been altered before it was pressed to the wall. Was this ritual mutilation? A sacrifice of flesh to secure favor from gods or spirits? Or were the fingers merely folded under, a symbolic gesture, a language of signs we can no longer read? Whatever the truth, the sight of those jagged prints forces you to confront a darker possibility that pain and blood may have accompanied beauty and pigment. And yet the mystery deepens when you realize this is not unique. Across the world, in caves scattered across continents, the same handprints appear. In Europe, deep in the caves of France and Spain, Paleolithic people blew pigment around their hands, leaving stencils that look almost identical to those in Patagonia. In Australia, ochre hands bloom across sandstone. In Africa, ghostly palms spread across cliffs under the burning sun. These people never knew one another, never shared words or bloodlines, yet they chose the same gesture, the same haunting mark. Why the hand? Why everywhere? Perhaps because it is the one symbol all humans share? The first tool, the first weapon, the first extension of the self. To press it against the stone was to declare, I am here in the simplest, most undeniable way. But to surround it in color, to fix its absence into permanence, that was something else. That was an act of transformation, of reaching beyond the moment into eternity. Science can measure dates, test pigments, chart migrations, and even reconstruct the methods of creation. But it cannot answer the most important question. What did the hands mean to those who left them? That truth belongs only to the dead, and they are not speaking. We may never know what they truly meant. But if you refuse to subscribe to Cave Tales Ancient History, maybe you don't want these voices remembered at all. If that's you, say it in the comments, because silence is its own answer. For centuries, the cave remained hidden in plain sight, its walls whispering to those who lived in its shadow. It was not until the modern age that the world beyond Patagonia finally began to listen. Explorers carried back sketches, scientists returned with photographs, and suddenly the Cave of the Hands was no longer a secret. It was a revelation. In 1999, the weight of its silence was finally recognized, and UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, marking it as one of humanity's oldest and most fragile treasures. Yet, with recognition came danger. Tourists began to arrive, their curiosity genuine, but their presence heavy. Fingers brushed against pigments that had survived untouched for millennia, oils from skin bleeding into the stone. Vandals carved their own names, as if history's oldest gallery was nothing more than a canvas for modern arrogance. Even the breath of visitors, the change in humidity and heat, began to wear down the pigments. The same silence that had preserved the cave for 9,000 years was broken, and in its place came the slow corrosion of admiration turned careless. Science has stepped forward, not only to understand but to protect. Advanced imaging technologies, infrared scans, digital mapping, multispectral photography, are peeling back the layers of time without touching the stone. These tools reveal faint, hidden stencils, older hands buried beneath the visible ones. Ghostly shadows rise again, hands that no living person has seen for thousands of years, now uncovered by machines that can read what the human eye has forgotten. It is as though the cave itself is still unfolding, revealing new voices one layer at a time. But no machine, no UNESCO decree, can protect the cave alone. The people of Patagonia, descendants of those who first pressed pigment to stone, stand as its guardians. They monitor the site, guide visitors, and fight to ensure that the chorus of hands does not fade into silence once more. The cave is not simply an archaeological wonder. It is a living inheritance, a responsibility carried by those who walk its valleys today. And still, the question lingers. Will we honor that inheritance? Or will we let the greed of the present erase the voices of the past? The cave is not merely a chamber of stone, it is a reservoir of memory. Each handprint is a quiet voice pressed into the earth, refusing to be silenced by time. They do not speak in words, but in presence. They remind you that long before your name, your language, or your world existed, others stood here. Others felt the same fear of vanishing, the same hunger to be remembered. What is a handprint, if not the most human of signatures? It is the mark of labor, of violence, of tenderness. It holds the power to build and to destroy, to take life and to cradle it. In Patagonia, those hands are stripped of flesh, but not of meaning. They remain as symbols of continuity, proof that across centuries of change, across the death of cultures and the collapse of empires, the simplest gesture endures. A palm pressed flat against stone, saying, "I was here." Look closely, and you will see more than ancient pigment. You will see the outline of your own hand, the echo of your own presence, mirrored in silence across thousands of years. They reached into stone so we might still see them, so we might still feel the weight of their existence pressing against ours. In their absence, they remind us of our own fragility, of the truth that what we leave behind may be the only part of us that endures. If you've watched this far into Cave Tales' ancient history and still haven't subscribed, I want you to answer one question in the comments. What could possibly silence you when these ancient hands still try to speak? Tittle. The Painted on Patagonia. A cave full of quiet voice.